Welcome to History 1302. Today we're going to be talking about the Progressive Era. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and go over the unit objectives, or the chapter objectives, I guess. So the first thing we're going to cover is we're going to talk about the reform efforts of the Progressive Era and the groups involved with those efforts. Then we're going to talk about the different methods used by the state to bring about reforms in state governments during the Progressive Era. We'll also be identifying the progressivism of Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Next, we'll discuss the involvement of women's groups in the Progressive Era reform. And we'll describe the ways in which American culture was influenced by the progressive movement. Great. So a couple of things. In the last unit, we were talking about, industrialism and the complete transformation that the United States underwent after the Civil War. As a consequence of that, there was a lot of corruption, a lot of inefficiency in the federal government, and really even at the states level and at the local level too. But one of the hallmarks of that Gilded Age politics was the political machine. In fact, it was one of and continues to be one of the more, infamous examples of these types of corruption, political corruption, and patronage. Okay, so when we look at what's happening at the turn of the century, there is a lot of inefficiency in government. There are a lot of corrupt politicians and judges. Wealth and power rest with the few. And for those that are involved in politics, one of the hallmarks of the Gilded Age is the spoil system, or patronage. If you've never heard of patronage before, we're probably more familiar with this term in Spanish, especially here in Laredo, the patron system. And even if you've never heard of the patron system, you might have heard of this phrase. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And basically, it goes to the heart of this problem where you got to have these connections. It's about having some kind of, friends in government, or compadres, or, cousins, or family, or whatever. And, Laredo is no stranger to that. We have a long history of corruption and political machines that go way back and continue to be a problem even today. So I want to show you a little bit about just how badly things were with the whole spoil system and the political machines. And I want to begin by talking about Tammany Hall. So I'm going to play for you this video right here on Boss William Tweed, and just pay attention to how horribly corrupt everything was with this guy, okay? Listen to the kinds of crimes, right, that they would do, and pay close attention to how they would do this, okay? So here's a video on Boss William M. Tweed and the political machine known as Tammany Hall.
Fireman and one-time chairmaker from the Lower East Side, there had never been anyone quite like William M. Tweed. Over 6 feet tall and nearly 300 pounds, he was surprisingly nimble and graceful on his feet. Caricatured by his Republican opponents as a vulgar, hard-drinking Irishman, he was in fact a fourth-generation Scots Protestant, unfailingly courteous and nearly teetotal. He was also a superb politician who took care of his mainly immigrant constituency, providing jobs for the unemployed, coal in winter, and orphanages, hospitals, and shelters for the poor.
He was one of the first people who saw the power of mass politics in the cities. And for all his thievery, there was the recognition of mobilizing this mass of people to some political end. I think he's not remembered for that. He's remembered for the $50 million that he stole, which if you wanted to get the equivalent today, multiply times 10.
Accelerating New York's already explosive growth still further, Tweed and his associates brazenly siphoned off staggering sums from the hundreds of city projects under their control, and helped robber barons like Jay Gould and Jim Fisk make off with still more. There were lucrative contracts for grateful builders, who happily paid Tammany's leaders enormous cash kickbacks to get them. There were thousands of jobs for Tammany's loyal constituents, who gratefully voted Tammany's leaders back in power. New York's upper classes, meanwhile, professed to be appalled, but quietly looked the other way as real estate values in the city skyrocketed. It all worked like a machine, a political machine, and no one knew how that machine worked better than William Tweed, who by 1870 had concentrated more power in himself than anyone in the city's history.
It was Tweed who helped maneuver the money through the city council, or the Board of Aldermen as it then was, for the Brooklyn Bridge, for Central Park, for a lot of the road repair and the creation of streets and avenues in uptown Manhattan. Now, he made a lot of money with that. And it was absolutely corrupt.
Tweed's first position was Commissioner of Public Works. He was no fool. And if you know where the sewer lines are going to go, and if you know where the new street extensions are going to be opened up, and you get there first, and you buy up that territory, all you got to do is sit back, wait, and boom, the price explodes. So Tweed, in fact, became one of the largest real estate owners in the city.
I think there was something in him, some overpowering appetite that he could never slake. He couldn't have one mistress, he had to have two. He couldn't have one roast beef, he had to have four, and he couldn't have two judges, he had to have them all, and finally it caught up with him and destroyed him.
In 1870, as newspaper editors and indignant reformers began questioning where Tweed's lavish lifestyle came from, all eyes turned to the still unfinished county courthouse on Chambers Street, a special project of Tweed's. Begun in 1858, it was supposed to have cost $350,000. 12 years later, the price tag had reached $13 million and kept right on rising.
Somehow or another, this one building, which is actually quite a nice building, wound up costing more than the entire Houses of Parliament. The deal was straightforward. We want to buy a lot of chairs. How much does that chair cost? Let's say $5. No, says Tweed, you don't mean $5, you mean $50. Oh, I do. All right. And, give me the chair, $50, 20 back for you, and so forth.
Even the most worldly New Yorkers knew that something had to be done. People begin to tire of holding their noses, George Templeton Strong wrote, and are looking about in a helpless way for some remedy.
No caliph, khan, or Caesar has risen to power or opulence more rapidly than Tweed I. 10 years ago, this monarch was pursuing the humble occupation of a chairmaker. He now rules the state as Napoleon ruled France. There is absolutely nothing in the city which is beyond the reach of the insatiable gang who have obtained possession of it. The New York Times.
In 1869, a German-born artist named Thomas Nast, with close ties to the Republican Party, began publishing a series of political cartoons in Harper's Weekly. Week after week, Nast relentlessly excoriated what he called the Tammany Hall Ring. There was Peter Brains Sweeney, the city treasurer, Mayor Abraham Oakey Hall, Tweed's puppet in City Hall, Richard Slippery Dick Conley, the comptroller, and Boss Tweed himself, whom Nast depicted as a licentious, balding, overfed monster, literally devouring the city. I don't care a straw for newspaper articles, Tweed declared. My constituents don't know how to read, but they can't help seeing them damned pictures.
He was the object of one of the most successful campaigns by a political cartoonist in history. Thomas Nast really did the most extraordinary job of attacking Tweed and exposing the Tweed ring in Harper's Weekly. Those pictures will live forever. The way you can never separate Nixon from Woodward and Bernstein, you can't separate Tweed from Thomas Nast. They're wed together for the rest of history, I guess.
On July 8, 1871, the New York Times joined the fray, publishing excerpts from secret courthouse records obtained from a disgruntled city official. Tweed had cheated out of thousands of dollars in kickbacks. The figures were astonishing. 11 thermometers had been purchased for $7,500, dust brooms for $41,000. One contractor had been paid $5.5 million for window shades, carpets, and furniture. It would never be clear how much Tweed's corruption had been exaggerated by the press. The New York Times put the final tally at almost $200 million. But in the end, it didn't matter. New York needed a villain equal in scale to its giant park and giant bridge. And Tweed fit the bill, in part because he simply looked the part.
He ended up a sad, tragic figure because he basically took the fall for a system. And the system involved the bankers, the so-called respectable people, the Goulds and Fisks and all those guys who were not really indicted for the things that Tweed ended up taking the fall for.
On December 15th, 1871, Boss Tweed was indicted on 3 counts of fraud and grand larceny. And 2 months later, 220 misdemeanor charges. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and though the convictions were later overturned, a civil suit stripped him of his assets and forced him into prison. Gaunt and ailing, he eked out his last years in jail. In the winter of 1875, he somehow slipped past his guards and escaped to Spain, but he was quickly recaptured and returned to prison. The Spanish police, it was later said, had recognized him from one of Thomas Nast's cartoons. On April 12, 1878, he died of pneumonia in his cell in the Ludlow Street jail he himself had built, penniless and broken.
He gets a lot of the blame. Think of as legitimate politicians. There are other bosses that had a smoother style. I think part of the reason that people remember Boss Tweed, he was so flamboyant, and by the time his downfall, he was such a leftover from another age.
A villain of more brains would have had a modest dwelling, in secret. His successors here will not imitate him in this, but that he will have successors, there is no doubt.
Okay, so as you can see, the problems that the progressives are going to try to tackle are deep-rooted and, pretty big. So when we get to, the progressive era, by the time we get to 1895, because that's what the progressive era is. We're talking about a very specific time period, from 1895 to about 1920. And this goes back to the first unit, right? We were establishing all of the problems that came with the nation growing, with the consequences of the end of the Civil War and the emancipation of millions of former slaves, problems with industrialization and immigration. And so, that was the basis of Unit 1, but now with Unit 2, and especially with the beginning of Chapter 19, it's about dealing with those problems. So, before we get into how they fix these problems or how they attempt to address them, we need to talk about who the progressives are. Okay, so let's talk about what progressivism is and who the progressives are. Okay, so first of all, progressives are not radicals, okay? They may seem radical, but they're not, okay? They are moderate reformers. They do believe that there are many problems in society, huge problems that need to be addressed, but they're not going to be radical in their approach, I guess is what I was trying to say. Another important thing about them is that most of these folks are middle to upper class men and women, okay, especially the women. The women are a huge part of the progressive movement too. And it's also significant that they are middle and upper class because these are people that are college educated, they have the means, they get an education. Most of the progressive reformers are not going to be, people that work in a factory or people that are impoverished because, quite frankly, those folks are too busy working long hours for very little pay. So even though they're the ones that are most likely to benefit from the progressive era reforms, the progressives, right, the ones that are doing all the work to change society, to tackle society's problems and the problems within the government are going to be middle and upper class men and women, college educated, mostly whites, and they're believers in the scientific method. So when they look at a problem in society, they are going to try to deal with it by using the scientific method, right? So if you remember, way back when you were in elementary, middle school, and you used to do like the science fair stuff, it was like the best time of the year, right? If you remember the scientific method, right? What's the first step in the scientific method? It's not hypothesis. I always get hypothesis. People always tell me that. And no, before you start hypothesizing, you have to do what? You have to identify a problem, right? So what is the problem? And then you can start, trying to, you develop your question and then you develop a hypothesis and then, you go and you gather the data and all of that. And that's what the progressives do. So for example, there's a huge problem with drinking. America has a huge drinking problem. So what do the progressives do about it? Well, they identify the problem. Domestic violence is a consequence of America's drinking problem, or child abuse and neglect, or spousal abuse. So they're going to hypothesize that, if you remove alcohol from the equation, then, you won't have that problem anymore. And guess what happened? That's exactly what they did. They got rid of alcohol. They prohibited its sale, distribution, and use. So again, when we're looking at the progressive era, who are the progressive reformers? Middle and upper class men and women, college educated, mostly white, believers in the scientific method, and most important of all, they're not radicals. Okay, so don't forget that part. Now, the other sort of angle here, the other facet to progressives is knowing what it is that they want. Okay, first of all, it's like, who are they? And then what do they want, right? They want more government involvement. What they want is for the government to move away from laissez-faire politics. Remember that during industrialism and all that, the government was hands-off, which is what laissez-faire means, right? Hands-off government, doesn't get involved. That's not what the government does. Those are social issues, or those are, issues dealing with employment or whatever. But progressives are saying, no, these problems are too big. We need the government to get involved. So it's a move away from laissez-faire government. Now, the good thing about this is progressives have a genuine desire to help people. They really do. They see these problems. They want to be able to take care of people. They're concerned for their well-being, and they want to do something about it. The problem with that, right, the dislike here is that there is an element of social control attached to it. So while their care for them, their concern for people is genuine, and I might even say is well intentioned. The element of social control here is that it's attached to this belief that they believe that they know what's best for these people, whether it be children or women or immigrants or workers or what have you, okay? And I want to remind you a little bit about, what I mentioned in the previous unit with the young Native American girl, Sitkala Sa, right? So she went to this school and she was completely traumatized by that experience because, they chopped off her hair, they changed her clothing, they changed her name. She went through this dramatic transformation, and at the end of it all, she really regretted it. Now, did those people, who, by the way, they were Quaker, missionaries, did those people do that to her with bad intentions? No, they genuinely believed that this was what was best for these Native American children, in light of all the racial tension and dramatic changes that we were going through at that time. They thought that was a way to ensure like a future for these kids, is to assimilate them into American society, white American society. And so that's where that element of social control is. And so when we look at the progressive era reforms, do they care about the well-being of these people that they think they're helping? Yes, they really do. But their approach is connected to an element of social control, whereby, their method of helping is, by doing what they think is best for them. Okay, so later on when we talk about Whole House and, some of these other organizations that are aimed at helping immigrants, find jobs and sort of like acclimate to life in the United States. Remember, a lot of them, they come here and they don't know English, they don't know anybody here, they don't have any jobs. The whole industry is working against them, and it's not favorable to them. So there's an effort to help them, but how are they going to do that? Well, by assimilating them, right? By Americanizing them. And so we'll get into those details pretty soon, okay? So again, who are the progressives? What do they want, right? Make sure that you are very clear about this moving forward, okay? Now, the other thing as well is that during the progressive period, there is a very pronounced change taking place in the United States government, okay? And the reason for this is because of industrialization, of immigration, urbanization, right? The cities are growing, populations are booming. It changed the country so quickly that, basically progressives feel that society is quickly, losing control. These problems are so huge that there really isn't any agency or any group that is powerful enough or strong enough or big enough to tackle these problems, okay? The only thing big enough to deal with the problems with industrialization, immigration, urbanization, it is the government, okay? That's the only thing big enough that can fix these problems. But remember, what's the problem with the government moving into this time period? Well, the government is corrupt. The government is inefficient. Politicians do not work in favor of the American people. They work in favor of, the corporations and their contributors, right? So before progressives can use the government to clean up society and society's problems, they need to clean up the government first, okay? So that's where we get to this part right here, right? Cleaning up the government. And so I want to talk about 3 different methods that they're going to use to clean up the government, to make it more efficient. The first one is initiative, okay? Initiative allows for the voters to demand attention to a particular issue that they're concerned with, okay? This is where the voters take the initiative, okay? They're not going to wait for city council to act on something. They're not going to wait on the federal government to pass a law. This is coming from the citizenship, right? They are bringing something up to the attention of the local, the elected politicians, and they are demanding action, okay? So this is what an example of initiative is. Now, if we think in terms of what's going on in Laredo or an example of an initiative, I wish I was in class with you, then I would be asking you this. But think, for example, like the plastic bag ordinance, right? There was a huge problem in Laredo where there was trash everywhere, plastic bags everywhere. I remember driving down the highway and, there's like all these bags flying everywhere in the back. And so it was really kind of like a grassroots movement, and then, trying to bring attention to it. And that's how the initiative started, and it got the attention of elected officials. And what did they do? They banned the plastic bags, right? And so if you remember, we used to have to go to HEB with our reusable bags and stuff like that. And at first it might have been, an inconvenience, and, oh, I forgot my bags again. But at the end of the day, did it help? Well, it did. There's pictures. I've seen pictures in the research that they did where the pollution, not pollution, but the littering significantly decreased, but it wasn't eliminated, right? Because the problem, I'm sorry to say this, but the problem was not the bags, okay? The problem is what? The people. People are the problem. They litter, right? So just because they couldn't throw out plastic bags everywhere, they still continue to litter, right? They still continue to throw things out of the cars, beer bottles, trash, taco bags, you name it. I've seen it all on the streets, on, morning jogs and stuff like that. So, again, so anyways, the whole bag thing ended up, we're back to plastic bags, okay? But you can thank the lawsuit that went to the Texas State Court. So anyways, more on that later. So initiative, this is about giving power to the people, giving them, the power to bring something up to the attention of the government, to do something, to bring attention, bring action to a concern that they have. Okay, number 2, referendum. And there's different types of referendums, but the one I want you to know about is specifically deals with issues dealing with public funding of public projects, okay? So we're talking about taxpayer money going into funding, public works, projects and stuff like that. So if it's dealing with money issues, it should be up to the people, right? Especially if we're talking about tax dollars. Think about the video that we just saw, right? All of that money, all of those projects, the bribes and the kickbacks, and they inflated the cost. Well, it's not a victimless crime, and although Tweed and guys like George Washington Plunkett would have said, it's honest graft. I'm only stealing from, skimming from the top, and I've seen my opportunities and I take some, like Plunkett famously said. It's not a victimless crime, because who is paying for all of this? It's the American taxpayer. It's you and me. So when the government puts something on the ballot, for example, they want to build a water park, right? We've been hearing that for decades. Or they want to build a new entertainment center, or they want to build a convention center downtown, right? They're not going to make that decision by themselves, right? Because this is what happens. We have corruption, we have greed, and we have the fleecing of the American public. Instead, a referendum ensures that the power, again, goes back to the American people, that if this is about taxpayer dollars, that it's a taxpayer that gets to decide whether or not they want that project, right? So pretty much every election year, we have some kind of referendum that is out there. And again, if we were in class today, I'd be asking you, can you give me an example of a referendum, an issue that's been put up to the people of Laredo? Do you want this project to go forward? Yes or no? Because at the end of the day, you're going to pay for it. You and me and our kids and their kids probably. So I think it was last year there was a referendum, an issue on the ballot where for the convention center. They wanted to build a convention center downtown in the La Posada area, and the people of Laredo said no. There was also another issue on the ballot where a sheriff wanted to build a new jail. I think to the tune of, gosh, I don't know how many million, 500 million, I don't remember. It was an incredible amount of money. And what did the people of Laredo say? Ni modo. Too bad. You got a jail right there. Make it last. And again, I think it was the same year, another referendum for a sports complex, and that one did pass. And I think it's going to be somewhere in the South Side, and it's interesting because the people that paid for the advertising, it's like, oh yes, we want a new sports activity complex and with baseball fields and this and that. Is this company where they're basically trying to bid for this sports complex to be built on that property that they own. So, but anyways, what ended up happening? They put it on the ballot, and the people of Laredo voted yes for that one. So that's something that should be coming up pretty soon. I think I heard something about it recently also on the news. So that's how it works, right? This is about cleaning up government. This is about bringing power back to the American people, which brings me to my third and final point for today, which is a recall. Now, when you have elected officials that are inefficient, corrupt, not doing their job, or misrepresenting their office, there should be something, a mechanism in place to remove them. And that is what a recall is, okay? So in a recall, the voters decide to end the term of an official early. If they believe that they're not doing their job, or or a disgrace, or should be removed for a number of reasons, mostly having to do with criminal behavior. And again, we've had a history of this too in Laredo, where a few years ago there was a recall election where, I'm not going to name any names, you can look it up, but a council person was, allegedly caught doing something, and there was all kinds of accusations, and anyways, it was a lot of drama, and this person ended up getting recalled. Essentially, the voters of his district had an election, a special election, and they voted to remove him, and he was out. And then they had another special election to replace that council person, and that's the way that it works. That's the way that a recall function works. Also, Even at a state's level, it's happened too. In California, they recalled the governor of California. They didn't like him for whatever reason, and they had a special election. And who got elected to be the governor of California as a result of it, of that recall? The governor, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger. So, again, these three tools: initiative, referendum, recall, are aimed specifically at cleaning up government. Why? Because progressives want the government to take action on these huge problems within American society. But before they can do that, they got to clean up the government first. Okay? So, initiative, referendum, recall, know the three. Know the examples, right? Think of some different examples that you might have seen as well. Try to, don't just look at this information and go, oh, okay, that was in the 1900s. Try to see, okay, do we still have examples of that going on today? Have I heard of anything that sounds familiar? And I promise you, it'll help you cement like a better understanding of this material moving forward. Okay, so for today we're going to end it here. Make sure to come back for the next lecture, continuation of the progressive era. Hope you guys have a great day. See you later.